the 6th of March, 1945. Cologne, Germany. A German Panther waits behind the rail yard, gun locked down a stone lane that points at the cathedral. The crew is steady. They have done this all winter, let the American tank swing wide, show its soft plate, end it with one clean 75. The loader rests his palm on the next round. The gunner's breath is slow. They expect a Sherman. A shape noses out from the corner and refuses the wide arc. Lower hull, heavier mantlet, a blunt muzzle brake. The American driver holds the angle like a vice. Through the Panther sight, the frame is too still. The commander's mouth forms the start of a correction. The American fires first. The hit lands like a door slamming in a small room. White flash at the turret ring, then orange. Paint blooms. A second round crosses the smoke before the first echo dies, raking the gun mask. The loader in the Panther reaches for the intercom and never finishes the touch. The traverse handwheel jolts under his fingers, then slackens. A third impact turns steel to sparks. The gun sags. Heat climbs the throat. The commander's headset hisses but carries no voice. Outside, the cathedral stands in the view like a witness, while the American tank keeps its sight picture and does not move. No radio call. No order. Just heat ticking metal and air pulling through the open seams. The crew understands the shape in the street is not here to trade. The old drill wait bait, the swing kill, does not apply. Whatever the Americans brought today is built to hold the first look and erase what it sees. By early March 1945, Germany is fighting on borrowed time yet still betting on old certainties. Fuel is rationed to fumes. Rail lines are cut and recut. Veteran crews are irreplaceable. Green replacements arrive with fewer hours than the machines they climb into. But inside cities west of the Rhine, one belief still buys confidence. A well-placed heavy or a disciplined Panther crew can freeze a street force American armor to widen its turn and end the exchange with a single flat 75 at city. Distance. Cologne bridges shattered, cathedral spires intact, streets funneled into predictable kill lanes, seems built to prove that belief one more time. Across the river, the American mood is not triumph. It is acceleration under fatigue. Tank battalions have learned the hard lessons, front plates torn by 88 seconds, columns chewed in alleys where a second's wobble costs a turret, and they have rewritten habits to survive. The change isn't a miracle chassis rolling off a train and winning the war alone. It is tempo plus answers arriving on time. A heavy gun tank that can hold a sight picture in a narrow lane. Gunnery that prizes the first steady view over the old wide swing. Infantry that advances with radios tied into artillery that actually answers. Bridging and wrecker teams that show up the same hour, not the next day. The stakes live beyond one corner and one duel. If the German street corner geometry still rules, the Allies bleed minutes into days and days into weeks. Enough time for the Rhine to harden, for pockets to organize, for fuel shortages to matter less than terrain. If the Americans can break that geometry on camera in a major city, the lesson scales instantly. Crews imitate what they see work, and doctrine travels faster than orders when the proof is visible in a few seconds of film. The same pattern is already deciding other layers. In the air, deep escort has turned rare high-risk raids into routine. When fighters can ride the bombers all the way in and still have fuel to chase the interceptor's window closes, the decision space for the defender shrinks to a climb that will not finish before contact. That air change does not just protect aluminum, it protects trucks and fuel bozers and bridging stock that make it to the front, because marshalling yards are hit when planned, not when weather and luck align. On the water, the Atlantic has flipped from stalking ground to hunted ground. Forward-thrown contact weapons, radar and direction finding mean a submarine captain's first mistake is often his last. The mission log turns from tonnage sunk to odds of return. These are not side stories. They are the supply lines that allow an armoured battalion to appear in a city like Cologne with ammunition recovery assets and replacements the same week it fights. Germany's remaining edge in March 1945 is psychological. The aura of singular machines and crews. The big cat at the corner, the pilot who knows the vertical better than his opponent, the U-boat that owns the night sea. That aura thrives on pauses in the enemy's system, gaps between sorties, gaps between convoys, gaps between a tank's first sight and its first accurate shot. The American answer shortens those gaps to zero. A tank that can take and keep a stable view for 3 seconds in a street fight collapses the ambush script as surely as a long-range escort collapses the interceptor's script, as surely as a radar contact collapses the ambush. Submarines. When scripts demyths after them. There is a narrow window here, where the outcome is still expensive if the pattern holds. If American armor must still circle bait and prey, each block costs bodies and hours. Bridges stay blown, crossings delay. Another city becomes another lesson in caution. If instead the first look becomes the last necessary look, blocks fall faster than defenses can reform. The Pershing in Cologne is not a trophy shot. It is the demonstration that the United States can now force that 3-second truth anywhere it can bring rails and fuel. Risk tolerance flows from replacement math. The side that can absorb losses can push new answers forward before they are comfortable. That is why a heavy gun tank arrives and fights within days, why a fighter with the range to escort in winter weather shows up in formation, why an anti-submarine group roams instead of waiting on convoy routes. On the other side of the river, every Panther, every experienced pilot, every boat is a national asset to be preserved. Preservation erodes initiative. Initiative is the only currency that buys back time when factories are silent and fuel stocks are theory. So the scene at the cathedral is not just a duel, it is a referendum on whether the American system can sustain contact while Germany cannot scale its remaining strengths. If the corner still belongs to the Panther, the war lingers in streets and cellar steps. If the corner now belongs to the crew that holds the first steady sight and finishes before the echo ends, the march to the Rhine becomes a schedule problem, not a tactical one. Cologne answers that question in less than a minute, and the answer does not stay on that street. It moves with every column that follows. In a city fight, the first steady view is food and air. The gunner who can hold that view for 3 seconds decides what burns and what keeps moving. For months, the Panther owned those seconds. Its gun is flat and fast at street ranges. Its front is a wedge that shrugs glancing hits. Its optics are patient and clear. The crew knows the choreography by muscle. Wait for the American to show more steel than sense. Let the sight settle on a plate that is too thin to argue, press and listen for the round to do the talking. The fear it spreads is practical, not mythical. A Sherman that wobbles its corner is a dead Sherman. A driver who oversteers gifts the German gunner a full breath of calm. You can feel it in the bones of any man who has ridden into a European block after rain. The cobbles add just enough bounce to widen the reticle when you least need it. A half-inch of sight drift at 200 meters is the difference between killing and becoming a picture. The Panther's strengths are the American crew's problems. Its nose denies easy angles. Its gun mask can take abuse while the German gunner keeps the reticle where it belongs. The loader works short motions. The next round is always where his left hand expects it to be. The commander's habit is disciplined silence until the words matter. He does not flood the net. Their world is 3 jobs, performed without thought. Keep the hull still enough that the gunner's breath can do its work. Keep the sight picture honest. Keep the loader's rhythm unbroken. Against crews who must swing wide, to see that discipline is a trap that does not announce itself until impact. What changes in Cologne is not that a miracle machine appears, it is that an American crew brings a different math to the same corner. The new gun does not argue about authority at city distance. A 90 that lands square turns steel into a furnace without asking permission. But the caliber is only the opening clause. The rest is how the vehicle and the crew let that energy arrive on the first look. The driver refuses the old arc that gave Panthers free seconds. He noses to the line and locks the hull the way an engineer locks a jig before cutting. The gunner accepts no bounce. He breathes in, lets the reticle stop walking, and has a loader who is already living half a second in the future. The turret motor answers smoother than the men have known on older mounts. When they ask for a small correction, it gives a small correction, not a sway that must be cancelled with another sway. Even without a fancy promise of magical stabilization, a steady hull, a trained hand on traverse, and a gun balanced for control give a sight that feels nailed to the target instead of dragged across it. A German crew expects the American to show the whole cheek of his face. Instead, they are handed a still frame of their own. The first hit is not a surprise so much as a denial of the correction the commander is forming of the breath the gunner wants to take. White at the seam, orange in the paint, a smell that no one forgets after the first time, burnt enamel, hot oil, a sweetness that makes the tongue hate the air. A second round arrives before the headset has carried a single finished word. This cadence is new. Crews used to the American pause, the micro-ritual of recoil, recover, hunt, are offered no ritual. The loader across the street has trained to treat ready rack, traverse and recoil as one motion. His gunner does not chase the sight back. The sight never left. You can call it ergonomics if you want a classroom. In the hull it is reach and weight, and how far a man must twist to lay steel in the breech. It is where his boot is when the hull jolts, whether his shoulder has to climb over something dumb, whether the case lands where it should or underfoot. A good loader keeps his own seconds small. In this fight, those seconds stack into a string the German cannot cut. The American crew's voices are minimal to the point of absence, a clipped up a breath that sounds like a word silence that means on. Every extra syllable is a shake in the sight. They learned that lesson watching other men burn. Now they extract the price from someone else. The Panther's own gifts become liabilities in this lane. Its long gun wants a long thought. At this range, the lag between intent and alignment is the space the other man fills with heat. Its front shrugs, the wrong hits, but there are fewer wrong hits now. A 90 landing fair on the lip of a weak seam does not argue about armor diagrams. And the German crew's best habit, waiting for the American mistake, meets an American who does not perform it. A pattern is a kind of armor. When the pattern dies, the man inside feels naked even before the fire touches him. Angle control is the whole game at stone corner distance. Track noise, turret whine, and a driver's wrists decide whether the sight lives on a seam or bounces off an edge. The American driver in Cologne treats the corner like a vice handle. Tighten stop, do not reopen until the job is finished. He does not hunt for a prettier line. A prettier line is a slower death. The gunner rides that stillness with a sight picture that stays the size of a coin. His first round is the sentence. His second is the period. His third is to make sure the page does not get up again. Everything that sounds like a brochure line becomes a living or dying detail when translated into this lane. Traverse that does not overshoot means the gunner does not soar back and forth, while the other man builds certainty. A breach that closes without a fight means the loader does not spend a second wrestling steel as the target cools. A trigger that breaks where the finger expects keeps the first shot honest. A trigger that lies creates ghosts in the reticle. Even the intercom matters. A net that carries a short word cleanly is worth more than a long speech that fuzzes. In the Panther, a hand goes to the throat mic and stops. The thing that needed saying was 3/4 of a word late. In the American tank, breath substitutes for language. No one narrates a kill that is already underway. Street texture is the enemy of bad habits. The men learned in mud and hedgerow that a heavy foot makes a nervous gun. Here, on slick cobbles and broken curb, the vehicle punishes any driver who treats it like a field. The American keeps the gearbox in the gear that holds a corner and refuses the temptation to creep forward for a nicer picture. Moving for beauty is how you die. The German expects that greed and wins his traverse to catch it. When the American does not give it, the Panther gunner's finger floats, and the window closes before he believes it has opened. Survivability turns from a chart into a feeling. In older fights, a hit on an American tank meant a sudden light change inside a slap of pressure that made hands forget jobs, a clang that told you to get small and pray. The second round took longer than the first. In this fight, the asymmetry flips. The German crew meets the inside of a furnace air the Americans have been breathing all winter. Paint vapor is the same color in any language. The difference is which side has time to act between one breath and the next. The American loader keeps feeding. The American gunner keeps the coin-sized sight on a place he knows the steel will accept fire. The American commander watches for the only thing that matters after the third round motion that deserves a fourth. This is how numbers become consequences. A gun that carries more energy at the muzzle is just a line until it meets a seam at city range, while the target is still deciding what to say. A traverse that can land in small bites instead of swings is just a claim until it keeps a reticle from walking off a mask, when your heart beats hard enough to shake your teeth. A loader's reach, measured in inches, is just a design note until those inches buy a second, and that second erases a man who believed your second would not come. The Panther remains a terrifying animal wherever the battlefield lets it control the first look. Open ground, long lanes, angles that force a chaser to show his face there it can still teach. But Cologne shows the other truth. In a city where corners compress time, and the better crew is the one that can refuse motion, the American answer is not glamour. It is steadiness. It is a refusal to wobble. It is the discipline to make the first look the last necessary look. That is why one lane in front of a church becomes evidence, not legend. The film does not capture specifications. It captures a survival rule being rewritten on a street where men had been dying to the old version for too long. The cupola slit frames, wet stone, and a corner that has killed before. He rests his chin against rubber that smells of old sweat and paint. Breath fogs the eyepiece for a blink clears. The driver's hands are light on the levers. He keeps the hull tucked behind brick engine, idling a slow, even pulse that transmits through the seat into the gunner's ribs. No one fills the net. When the commander wants quiet, quiet is the order. The loader has his left palm on brass. He flexes his fingers once, shakes them out, brings the round to his chest, waits. They have done this so often the weight has weight. American steel will show. It always shows. Winter has taught them that the first look belongs to the cat that does not fidget. The other side always fidgets. The gunner runs his fingers over the elevation wheel, feeling the knurling as if it tells weather. The sight sits where he wants it. The commander's hand taps the turret wall twice, not a signal, a habit. The driver exhales through his nose, tasting diesel and damp wool. On the far side of the intersection, the cathedral rises like a map reference that cannot be destroyed. The lane funnels toward it, slick cobbles, reflecting a pale sky. Somewhere, an American engine coughs, then steadies. The commander does not speak. He thinks a simple sentence in his own head, let them show their cheek. The loader smiles without humor. He has rehearsed the same thought, so often it comes with a taste. He angles his shoulders to give the rammer room when the breech opens. He knows where the empty will fall. He knows where his feet will not be when it does. Across the corner, the American driver bristles at the engine's vibration, then disciplines it. He feels the hull through his wrists and the small of his back metal translated into a living animal he must calm. The commander beside him has the same quiet the Germans imagine they own. He does not narrate. He puts 2 fingers against the gunner's shoulder. The loader in the American tank taps the ready rack with a knuckle, not to make a sound, just to feel wood and metal and measure distance blind. He can reach the next round without looking. He has burned that reach into his spine. The street breathes once. The American driver inches the nose until brick becomes air. The Panther gunner watches for the wide arc. He has trained his eye to catch the clumsy swing that offers a plate. The expected movement does not arrive. Instead, the shape holds. The silhouette is wrong, lower hull, a mantlet with unfamiliar jawlines, a muzzle brake that seems blunt, where he expects a different cut. The stillness is wrong too. The reticle usually climbs and drops with American impatience. Now it stays a coin pressed hard against his own front. The commander opens his mouth. The correction rises left small. It never leaves him. Inside the American turret, the loader's hands are already acting on a decision made 3 corners ago. Up, he says, a syllable shaped like a breath. The gunner's finger takes up the trigger, finds the breakpoint. He has taught it in drills when nothing burned. The driver locks his ankles and wrists as if holding a door against wind. The turret whine settles into the last hair of alignment and stops. The first shot closes the world to the size of a room. The Panther gunner's eyepiece turns white at the seam of the turret ring, then orange pushes through the white as paint and cloth surrender. He feels the shock as a soft thing and a hard thing together, the softness of heat arriving, the hardness of steel recoiling against supports. The loader flinches not backward but forward to the intercom button. The button is under his hand. His finger does not press. There is a word to say. It dissolves in his mouth. The American breech opens on its own habit. The case leaves the next round, enters the space it has earned. The loader's shoulder turns elbow-low motion, short like folding a shirt. The gunner keeps the sight where it was without chasing. He barely knows that he breathes. The commander watches the Panther's gun mask and counts inside his head, not in numbers, but in hits 1 done 2 needed. He does not waste an adjective on the net. The second round crosses smoke that has not decided to rise. It takes the gun mask at a place that once shrugged smaller shells. It does not shrug now. Sparks funnel. Something inside the German turret contributes fuel primer, dust oil, mist paint vapor, and the funnel becomes a brief column. The gun sags a degree, then another. The traverse handwheel slips under the gunner's palm, a living thing that always obeyed, now turning lazy, then light. He has the odd thought that the teeth feel like they have lost count. He tastes sugar in the heat, the sickly sweetness of burning enamel. His tongue pulls back as if it can hide. The American loader hears metal change pitch, a pitch that means do not stop until silence. He does not look to confirm. He shapes his world to the arc from rack to breech and back. He knows his feet will not find an empty casing. The turret basket catches it where it should. He knows his thigh will not smash a box that should not be there. The box is not there because someone cared in a depot 3 months ago. The gunner's eye is a tunnel. The driver's hands ache from stillness. A bead of sweat edges down his temple, decides to itch, and he refuses it the courtesy. The German commander's throat mic crackles with ambient noise fire, is a kind of voice when it eats close. He wants to say, smoke out of reflex, wants to order a back gear that will not engage in time. The driver slams at a lever that should answer. It answers too late. The loader tries to wedge himself between jobs, find the extinguisher, handle keep from being a target for his own crew's panic, protect his hand from metal that now burns like a stove. The gunner curses without breath a dry sound. He feels the eyepiece heat against his brow and keeps it there, because leaving it would mean admitting what is already true. The third impact arrives like punctuation. It does not negotiate. It writes the end of the sentence in a hand even a shaken man can read. The mask folds, the breech stutters into a position it was never meant to hold. Cables behind panels find flame and give it an easy path. The gun's shadow on the wall jumps and then disappears. The world becomes noise of expansion, metal ticking as it moves in heat. The loader mouths out of pure training, and hears nothing back. He opens the hatch on instinct, and meets air so bright with particles that his eyes water. He feels the ribbon strap of his headset pull at his scalp. He sits down without memory of deciding to. In the American tank, the intercom stays an extension of breath. On, up. Not full words, just enough to hold the chain unbroken. The commander glances right and left for threats that could turn a clean job into a trap. None present. He keeps his face still. The gunner keeps the coin of the sight fixed on a point low on the German turret, where steel once promised deflection. Promises are theory, when heat and stress open seams. There is a half-second where no one says anything on either side. In that half-second, the German gunner understands more completely than any report could tell him the old script will not run today. In that half-second, the American loader feels only weight and gravity, and the way the round's rim finds home when his wrist is right. The driver feels the engine as a patient animal, waiting for a rein he will not move until told. The commander's heart slows because the picture in front of him is the one he asked for and kept. Outside, the cathedral keeps its distance from both prayers and shots. Smoke climbs and flattens against damp air. The American hull does not creep for a nicer line. The nicer line is how a man gets killed. The Panther's silhouette loses definition corners, softening as heat paints them. A crewman tries to stand in the hatch and becomes an outline in light. The commander sees the motion and makes the only decision left that is both cold and humane. The gunner takes the cue without a syllable. Quick, low, decisive. The shape drops out of the picture. Silence returns as an accusation. Why does the net have no words? In a cockpit thousands of meters above some other city, another man once felt a different version of this half-second, the moment when a new escort arrived at altitude with fuel left after the pass. The body knew before the mind the climb would not finish today. In a conning tower on a grey morning, a captain once felt the same truth in the pattern of pings and the way the new weapon did not boom, but waited for touch. Here, in a lane of Cologne, the translation is direct, a reticle that does not wobble, a loader who does not narrate his own hands, a driver who refuses beauty, a commander who counts hits instead of time. The German crew's minds try to run checklists while their bodies retreat from heat. The loader's glove sticks to a handle and stays there after his hand lets go. The driver's boot finds a pedal that feels soft where it should feel stiff. Cables have softened under him. The commander feels air on his teeth and realizes he is breathing through his mouth to save the skin of his lips. He remembers a lecture about conserving machines. He discovers the lecture has no place in this room. The American tank does not celebrate. The men measure. The commander watches for any movement that might be a threat disguised as dying. The gunner's finger rests near the trigger, but no longer takes the slack. The loader untenses a shoulder and feels the ache arrive, the way pain waits until it is safe to appear. The driver swallows and finds his throat dry. He drinks nothing. He does not want the sound of a canteen in a place where sound is a map. There is no voiceover, no lesson spoken aloud. The lesson has already been taught to the only students who needed it. In the Panther, the half-second of silent understanding stretches into something longer, a space without orders where heat makes the decisions. In the American tank, the 3 seconds that mattered compress into a single memory. The sight held the first round honest, the second greedy, the third final. No radio call, no order. Just work done at the speed that keeps men alive. The lane resumes being stone and water, and a cathedral that outlasts both. The American hull waits another breath, then eases back into motion so slowly that the steel feels grateful. The German turret ticks as it cools, each sound a small admission. The loader on the American side closes his eyes for half a heartbeat, sees white and orange behind the lids, opens them, and looks for the next job. The driver flexes his fingers and keeps them still. The commander nods once, a motion only the 2 men beside him can see. The street keeps its secrets. The men keep theirs. The myth does not. It leaves with the smoke. The corner fight in Cologne makes sense only when set inside a machine that learns and supplies faster than it bleeds. A single tank duel looks decisive on film. What decides wars is how often a side can recreate that duel on demand, and how quickly it can correct the moments that go wrong. The American system doctrine, logistics, industry, command choices was built to shorten the loop from shock to answer. Germany's late war system, under fuel starvation and attrition, was forced to lengthen that loop until initiative leaked out of every seam. The first lever is adaptation speed. Units that had been taught to circle heavy German armor and call for help began to rewrite their habits in weeks, not seasons. After too many alleys, where a wobble meant a funeral, gunnery syllabi were cut down to a few brutal ideas. Hold the first sight fire before you narrate. Keep the hull still enough that the reticle reads like a coin on a table. Those ideas moved by film and rumor faster than any formal order could travel. The Cologne footage became an informal field manual, a heavy American gun, a still picture, a string of shots inside a breath. Crews imitated what they could see, and imitation at scale is doctrine, without waiting for a printing press. The second lever is risk tolerance born from replacement math. American command pushed new answers forward while they were still uncomfortable to maintain or scarce in number because the system behind them could absorb the cost of failures. A heavy gun tank could be railed offloaded and fighting in an urban grid within days. Teething problems would be solved while it killed and sometimes died. That choice is rational only when factories, depots, and training pipelines keep the flow steady enough that each trial does not endanger the campaign. The United States possessed that depth. Germany, by early 1945, did not. Each Panther or Tiger was a national asset to be preserved. Preservation is a kind of retreat disguised as caution, and caution at the wrong tempo seeds the initiative that heavy armor requires to dictate fights. Maintenance design turned into time on target. American vehicles were engineered and field-serviced as systems of parts, not irreplaceable sculptures. Power packs, final drives, and road wheel sets moved through echelons like blood cells. Recovery vehicles and wrecker teams trailed assault elements as a matter of habit. A damaged tank was a repairable node to be pulled back, not a tombstone to be abandoned. That belief existed because parts actually arrived, and mechanics actually had tools that fit. German heavy armor, built to high craftsmanship and tight tolerances in a starving economy, suffered from scarcity of standard spares and fuel to test them. A workshop can be superb. Without stocked bins and predictable deliveries, it is a museum. The supply chain underwrote tactics in quiet ways. Bridging arrived the same hour, not the next day. Blown spans turned from operational pauses into scheduling problems. Ammunition dumps moved forward behind columns that did not fear sudden cuts in the road net because air and engineer units worked ahead of that risk. Radios connected artillery with armor well enough that a request turned into steel where it was asked for, not where it was merely planned. Germany once excelled at local initiative. Late in the war, local initiative met empty fuel bozers and silent nets. When a commander cannot trust the next hour's logistics, he hoards his few decisive tools for a crisis that never resolves. When he hoards them, the crisis spreads. Air and sea layers were not background, they were scaffolding that held the ground fight upright. Long-range escort meant bomber streams arrived often enough and intact enough to damage the enemy's rail power and refinery nodes predictably. Predictable damage changes staff work. Timetables can assume interdiction rather than hope for it. Naval hunting groups freed from fixed convoy tracks by radar and direction finding and armed with contact weapons that punished a single mistake turned the ocean into a place where submarines tried to survive instead of hunt. Every truck that made it to a forward dump, every bridge that went up on time, every replacement crew that reached a staging area owed something to those upper and lower layers. A system is the multiplication of its parts, not the addition. Training pipelines mattered more than any single graduate. American flight schools, armor schools, and mechanics' courses did not produce artists. They produced replacement rhythm. The output was uneven as any wartime system must be, but it was sufficient in quantity and aligned with what units actually faced. Courses updated based on frontline reports. A trick that saved a crew in a French town could appear in a stateside syllabus before the season turned. German training collapsed inward as fuel grew scarce, and airspace over home fields turned hostile. Hours on engines decreased, just as the complexity of engines increased. Veteran instructors disappeared into combat, and the students who replaced them could not transmit what they had not been allowed to practice. In armor units, the mismatch between a sophisticated vehicle and a rushed crew is a tax that grows each time the vehicle breaks a track in mud or throws a drive sprocket, and there is no depth to fix it. Mobility logistics, bridging recovery route clearance decided how often a unit could force a fight on its terms. American engineer battalions followed headquarters that treated roads and rivers as solvable problems. Stores of pontoons, Bailey components, and demolition gear moved as part of a drumbeat, not as an afterthought. The outcome was a column that could keep its appointment with the enemy instead of arriving tired and short. German engineering units were skillful, but by 1945 they were starving for fuel explosives and undisturbed windows to work. A brilliant obstacle plan withers when the men to execute it lack trucks that start or air cover long enough to place charges. At the turret, face doctrine changes looked like small habits. Gunners trained to break the reflex to keep hunting for a prettier view. Drivers drilled to freeze the hull at the right second instead of polishing a line that would get them killed. Loaders learned to keep their worlds the size of an arm's arc and a boot's stance. Commanders shortened language until a breath counted as command. Those habits, born in instruction and enforced by survival, stacked atop technical features traverse that did not overshoot triggers that broke where fingers expected, breaches that accepted rounds without wrestling. The total was not glamour. It was the removal of friction. Friction removed at scale becomes operational momentum. Production and transport looked like numbers on paper and felt like time in a city street. Factories that built a little of everything in parallel tanks, trucks, radios, spare engines fed ports that had been expanded, dredged and scheduled to move metal by the calendar instead of by prayer. Railheads pushed forward behind armies that owned enough fuel to waste some and enough tires to tolerate rough roads. Germany tried to build masterpieces. The United States tried to build presence. A masterpiece can dominate a frame. Presence dominates a month. Command choices bridged the gap between capacity and effect. American headquarters accepted the cost of pushing immature solutions into mature fights. A heavy gun tank with limited initial numbers still changed behavior where it appeared because high command and field commanders deliberately placed it at problems that mattered: urban lanes, river crossings, strong points that had been eating companies. The point was not to win every duel, but to change the script so that the next battalion arrived with a different set of reflexes. German command, constrained by scarcity, and an enemy that could strike rail and road at will, treated heavy armor and experienced formations as fire brigades, to be preserved and shuttled. Fire brigades are reactive by definition. They are always late to the newest fire. Sustainment echelons were an invisible front line. American divisional trains and corps-level depots functioned like an organism that recycled damage. A knocked-out tank might return to the order of battle in days. A wounded crewman could meet a replacement crew in a functioning pipeline. Rifles, boots, radios, and rations followed predictable paths, even when weather and enemy tried to disagree. Germany's late-war depots were bombed, raided by requisition teams from other branches, or simply dry. When a repair part has to be machined locally because the train never came, the clock is already against you. When fuel drums are guarded as if they were gold bars, training patrols and rehearsals vanish first, leaving only the hope that bravery will substitute for practice. Information flow narrowed uncertainty for one side and widened it for the other. Operational research cells and staff officers tracked what actually caused losses: range bands, angles, terrain types, then fed that back into procurement choices and training emphasis. Radios were standardized enough that units from different states and months could plug into each other's nets and work by shared brevity. The other side often fought with courage and local skill, but courage and skill inside siloed nets can only delay defeat when the larger system cannot agree on a common picture or resupply the units that achieve local success. The psychological ledger flipped when the system began to guarantee the next contact. Once crews believe that ammunition, fuel, and replacement hulls will be present tomorrow, they will accept risks today, holding a sight in a deadly lane, pushing a crossing under observed fire, staying on a frequency long enough to coordinate a hit. Opponents who believe each vehicle and experienced crew must be saved for an imagined, decisive moment will avoid losses today, which seeds the initiative that creates decisive moments at all. This is not morality. It is arithmetic. Initiative is generated by willingness to spend and the ability to spend again. What looked like individual superiority in famous duels was often system leverage, wearing the mask of a single machine. A heavy round that arrives first exists because a training pipeline taught a loader to remove an extra gesture, because a depot stocked the right recoil springs, because a wrecker pulled that tank's cousin out of a ditch last week, returned it to the line so this crew could rest yesterday and shoot straight today. A city corner is the visible part of an iceberg. The unseen mass is rails uncut often enough, ports unblocked, long enough schools, updating fast enough, factories producing wide and deep enough. Germany's iceberg melted from below, while the visible tip still looked sharp. Air and sea superiority fed back into ground calculus daily. With escorts in the sky and hunter-killers at sea, the United States could plan arrival, not merely hope for it. Planning arrival, let corps commanders write schedules with the confidence to stack tasks, breach, exploit, cross, resupply, rotate. Schedules compress when confidence is high, and compressed schedules create too many simultaneous problems for a defender with thinning reserves. Germany, under constant air pressure, and with seas that punished transit, could plan presence only in islands of time and space. Between those islands lay gaps that the attacker filled. Even ideology, which had once animated aggressive doctrine, curdled into constraint. When a state requires prestige machines to symbolize will, those machines cannot be risked freely. When propaganda must promise invincibility, admitting mechanical fragility or tactical obsolescence becomes politically dangerous and operationally delayed. The United States did not need a symbol to stand still at a corner. It needed a crew trained to keep from moving, and a gun to make the stillness lethal. Symbols are brittle under artillery. Habits under supply are not. The net effect is visible without a chart. Fights shorten. Pauses shrink. Ambush patterns built on expecting a nervous enemy start to fail because the enemy no longer moves the way the pattern assumes. German crews feel it as unease then as caution, later as orders to avoid certain streets, certain hours, certain skies. Submarine captains log survival rather than tonnage. Fighter leaders calculate climb rates and discover the math ends before the interception begins. Armor commanders choose ground that allows withdrawal instead of streets that allow dominance. Each prudent choice makes sense in isolation. Together, they concede the month. The duel in front of the cathedral was a receipt, not a miracle. It showed how a doctrine that prizes the first steady sight, a logistics web that can afford to push heavy guns into cities on short notice, an industry that treats parts as plentiful, a command culture willing to spend answers before they aces, are polished, and a training system that teaches silent, repeatable motions can converge into predictable destruction of an opponent's pattern. The other side still had brave crews, sharp optics, and guns that killed when given their second. The system that could no longer buy that second lost the street. From that point forward, the strategic behavior changes look small in writing and huge in practice. German armor that once stood as a roadblock became something to be shepherded, then hidden, then saved for later. Later never arrived. German air that once picked its moments found those moments preempted by escorts that would not turn home in time to grant mercy. German sea that once harvested night and weather discovered that radar and patterns do not fear either. The lesson is not that one nation built a perfect tank plane or weapon. The lesson is that one nation built a way to keep contact, and the other could no longer scale the tools that once created fear. In cities, after Cologne, crews on both sides remembered the same 3 seconds for different reasons. One side remembered that a still picture and a heavy first round could end a myth. The other side remembered that myths do not stop steel, and that without fuel parts and time a superb machine is an expensive promise that heat will break. The outcome was written in factories and depots and classrooms long before it was filmed at a corner. But the corner is where anyone can watch the writing take effect. They did not write it down that night, but the knowledge moved through crews faster than orders. The thing that once froze a street, the big cat at a corner, the certainty that an American hull would wobble and show a plate no longer guaranteed time. Time was the German weapon. Time to settle the reticle. Time to correct a degree. Time to let the loader's breath finish before the commander spoke. In Cologne, time left without goodbye. A turret turned from machine to stove in the span that used to belong to them. Men who had taught themselves to be patient learned that patience had become a trap. The aura had always been more than thickness and caliber. It was a script everyone had memorized. American tanks respected it so much they behaved to fit its lines, circling, flinching, hunting for cleaner angles that only made them late. German crews felt the script as warmth in the jaw and calm in the forearms. That calm died when a still American sight did not blink. After the third impact, the quiet on the net made it official. No radio call, no order, just heat. When silence speaks that clearly myths do not argue. Word of mouth carried the change. Not speeches, not proclamations, phrases clipped thin and repeated with the flatness of fact. They did not swing. First hit was clean. 3 inside 10. Crews do not admire the enemy aloud, they adapt. German tank leaders began to choose streets with exits rather than corners with dominance. Positions gained pullbacks and alternate lines pre-planned not for discipline but for survival. The brief, brutal courage of standing in the open to dare a column became an indulgence no officer could justify twice. When a thing stops working in public, no amount of past reputation can keep it on the schedule. Above the streets, the same acceptance had already taken root. There was a season when a climb could still buy safety. It ended when escorts showed up with fuel to spare after the fight, not just enough to escort to a turn point. Pilots who once believed in vertical escape discovered the sky had acquired a ceiling lower than their hopes. Reports adjusted language without drama, unable to disengage enemy pursuit, continued to home field losses on recovery. The old trick had become the new risk. Surviving replaced intercepting as the thing to brag about, and bragging about survival is another way of saying defeat has entered the room. At sea, the learning was quieter, because the ocean eats sound, but the logs show the same arc. The men who ran at night on the surface to charge and sprint began to treat horizon lines as threats. The new pattern did not boom. It waited. Hedgehog was a patient weapon. Radar and direction findings squeezed the space where mistakes could be hidden. Bridges learned to read the water, not for prey, but for the mood of the hunt around them. It is hard to hunt when you feel watched. Harder still to take risk when the boat you risk cannot be rebuilt in time to matter. Back in the lanes of Cologne and towns like it, the change hardened into small rules. Do not anchor a turret where a rail yard gives the enemy direct approach. Do not hold a corner without smoke and a planned exit. Keep the gun depressed when a new American silhouette enters. Save the motor for a sprint, not for a duel. None of these made headlines. All of them were confessions, printed in the margins. The big cat was still deadly when it picked the ground and the hour, but ground and hour had narrowed to a handful, and those handfuls shrank with every bridge the enemy threw back across a river, and with every day the sky over depots stayed hostile. The collapse of belief is not a dramatic fall. It is the accumulation of tiny prudences until bravery has nowhere left to stand. A loader who once kept his body around the breech like a boxer changes his stance to favor the ladder. A driver who used to read cobbles as punctuation begins to read them as escape routes. A commander who had a gift for silence starts to talk earlier, because orders to leave hurt less than orders to die, for a script no longer supported by physics. Men measure others by the risks they take. When the bravest start to hoard themselves, the unit speaks a new language. What died exactly? Not the machine. Steel continues to kill when lines cross and men hesitate. What died was the arrangement of fear that let one side dictate the other's behavior. Tiger meant stop or be punished. Panther meant your mistake is inevitable. U-boat meant you cannot see what kills you. Interceptor meant, here, altitude obeys us. Those meanings needed pauses in the enemy's system, a refuel gap, an escort gap, a convoy unguarded, a gunner's wobble. When the American system stitched those pauses, shut the meanings unraveled. The creature called aura requires an ecosystem. The ecosystem had been dismantled one layer at a time. The admissions were small and often indirect. Avoid urban engagement without infantry support is one way to right the corner is no longer ours. Preserve heavy assets for counterstroke is a bureaucratic mask, for we cannot spend them at the rate this fight demands. Diversionary action, unsuccessful due to enemy escort, means the sky is owned by someone else every hour that matters. War has its euphemisms. Their common root is fear turned rational. On the American side, nothing mystical replaced the myth only work repeated and funded. Crews trusted that the next day would come with fuel and parts and replacements. That trust purchases steadiness. A driver holds a corner he would once have slid past. A gunner waits for the coin-sized stillness instead of snatching at a moving reticle. A commander says less because the chain no longer squeaks at every link. When men expect continuity, they risk correctly. Continuity is a weapon that does not photograph well, so people mistake its effects for magic. The camera at Cologne helped by putting a timestamp on the feeling. Now there was a clip to point at and say, here, this is when the script flipped. Evidence for a myth's death is behavioral. After Cologne, German units did not rush corners for honor. They pre-cleared them, smoked them, rerouted around them, or waited for demolitions. Pilots did not seek tall fights to prove a point. They slipped away low, or stayed grounded and hoped. Submarines did not range like wolves. They shadowed and survived, then wrote home about weather. None of these choices were cowardice. They were adaptations to a world where the enemy could keep showing up. In such a world, bravery without replacement is just a more expensive form of delay. The last part of a myth to die is speech. Men will still tell each other that a perfect shot at a perfect range can settle any argument. It can sometimes, but the war in early 1945 had lost interest in perfect shots. It rewarded the side that could create ordinary shots every hour. That is what the corner showed: ordinary disciplined violence executed on time. Once you can do that reliably, the monster across from you is no longer a monster. It is a target with history. So the line that no one said aloud became true anyway: we are not the thing they fear anymore. We are a thing they plan around. Plans are the opposite of terror. They invite schedules, and schedules are how a grinding war ends. The aura did not collapse in a speech or a final duel where a symbol fell. It broke in the quiet seconds after a third hit in the low voices that recommended detours in the hands that reached for survival tasks before orders caught up. The myth died, where myths always die, in the moment when bodies, not minds, change their behavior. After that, all that remained was heat, cooling on stone, and a city that moved one block closer to a river that would be crossed on time. The film from Cologne keeps showing up in classrooms and briefing slides because it compresses a year of learning into seconds. A heavy American gun holds a still frame, delivers a clean first round, and removes the certainty that a German crew believed in. Students pause on the moment the mask caves and the intercom goes quiet. They do not study it for drama. They study it because it shows how a street can belong to the first steady sight, not the thickest front. Reports written that spring read drier than the footage but point in the same direction. Urban strongpoints that once stalled battalions begin to fall on a timetable measured in hours. River approaches that invited ambush receive smoke, assault guns, and bridging materials in the same afternoon, not spread over a week of attrition. The language shifts. Fewer entries about crews circling for angle, more about direct entry, stabilized picture, first hit kill. When a phrase becomes common, a habit has hardened. Air and sea layers keep applying pressure that holds the ground fight in that new shape. Escort fighters ride bomber streams deep and still have fuel to chase on egress. The defender's windows shrink until planning an interception becomes a risk to the interceptor. Naval groups roam with radar and forward-thrown patterns. A submarine's first mistake is its last. The result is not just fewer attacks on columns. It is trucks that arrive, rails that stay repaired long enough to move bridge layers, depots that refill on schedule. A tank duel is rarely just a tank duel. It is the exposed tip of a supply schedule that survived the week. German behavior after Cologne shows acceptance without confession. Heavy armor is parceled to rear area reserves, held to plug breaches or counterattack only at distances that favor withdrawal if the first exchange goes wrong. City corners, once used for example, are avoided unless smoke infantry screens and pre-planned exits exist. Pilots pick low-level routes and short sorties. Unable to disengage appears often in diaries that once praised vertical hunts. Boat captains shadow and survive, then write about weather and defects more than targets sunk. These choices are rational. Each also concedes that the enemy can keep arriving with the same strength tomorrow. On the American side, continuity becomes a weapon with no headline. Depots stay stocked enough that recovery crews treat damaged hulls as work orders instead of memorials. Training units fold field lessons into syllabi before the season turns. Gunnery tables emphasize that the first honest picture wins. Drivers drill to freeze the hull at the second when freezing matters. The net effect is a force that expects to execute ordinary violence on time. Ordinary on time outlasts extraordinary, now and then. The city that provided the camera also provides a bridge for the next fights. Once Cologne's lanes are cleared, crossings to the east stop being rare events and become scheduling problems. Engineer battalions accustomed to working under observation begin to work under routine fighter cover. Artillery commanders become confident in response, windows tight enough to matter in alleys. Columns that used to pause for night move again because the risks that justified pauses have been priced down. No one writes the myth is dead in a log. They write departure times and arrival times and keep them. The footage also changes how crews talk to each other across units. A platoon that has not yet seen the new gun in action watches the clip and trims bad habits before first contact. No wide arcs for beauty, no narration on the net, no hunt for a cleaner line that will only expose a plate. Informal culture often moves faster than formal orders. When enough crews internalize the same 3 seconds doctrine exists, whether the manual has caught up or not. History will keep arguing over the usual measurements, gun versus gun, armor versus armor, but the argument is quieter after the spring of 1945, because the more important measurement has become clear: who can afford to risk a duel today and replace the loss tomorrow. The answer on most days is the side that took Cologne the way it did. That is why the duel on film is not a trophy. It is a receipt. Two questions remain useful to argue in the comments under any clip of that street. If Pershing units had been present 6 months earlier, does heavy German armor still shape the autumn fights, or does the pattern break sooner in places like Aachen and Metz? If a machine has better paper qualities but cannot be risked, often is it still better than a machine that invites risk because the system behind it pays the bill? The story does not end at a single corner. It moves down the road to the medium that Germany called its perfect answer to everyone else's numbers. That machine, fast, flat gun, fine optics, worked best when the enemy still circled for angle and arrived tired. Next, the series goes there. A Panther that expects reverence meets a formation that brings presence bridges, thrown up on time, smoke laid where it should be, Shermans appearing again after yesterday's losses. The question will be the same, one the footage from Cologne already began to answer. In a war decided by who can keep contact, does a perfect medium matter more than a system that refuses to stop showing up?